surgeon from Mumbai, has done a lot of pioneering work in the field of vitreoretina. Specifically, he has gained a lot of name after doing surgery for central retinal artery occlusion, which we were remembering yesterday. So Nishikant, we'll request you to start this session with this topic: clinical evidence of brolucimab. What is the evidence? Why are we forced to consider this molecule also? Nishikant. Nishikant, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Good morning, and thanks a lot for that lovely introduction, and thanks to Novartis for arranging this session on this newest kid on block, the brolucizumab. Now, as we know, this is a sponsored session, so that was my disclaimer. And as we know that neovascular AMD treatment strategies usually fail, and they usually fail after the second year because of the decline by the visits by the patients and also the reduced number of injections. So, but what if we get a same result with reduced number of injections and also with a good number of reduction in injections and visits by the patient? And that will be a perfect thing because whenever you look at the unmet needs that we have, and we ask many people, even the physicians, most of them believe that if we reduce the burden on the patients and the number of injections, but by maintaining the same amount of effectivity, it is going to be a game changer. So basically, we have been trying to have a lot of flexible regimens like treat and extend, etc., to come in basically to reduce the burden on healthcare resources. But many a times, these regimens have also failed because there is a delay in detection of the recurrences and leads to suboptimal therapy. Now, the ongoing challenge, therefore, was to maintaining the efficacy of treatment but reducing the clinical visits and injections. And the answer for that might be in form of this single chain antibody fragment called brolucizumab that has been developed. Now, what is so beautiful about the brolucizumab is that it has got a very, very small molecular size, about 26 kilodaltons, which increases its penetrability, and it's also got on top of it a longer duration of action. So it gives you both more punch power and a longer duration of action also. Now, this particular molecule has not been rushed through, but it has gone through a series of trials which are seen in every molecule that we have got till now. It has gone through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 uh, clinical trials. And today we'll be discussing about the phase 3 clinical trials, that is the Hawk and the Harrier trial. Now, the Hawk and the Harrier trials were the phase 3 multi-center randomized double-masked clinical trials, which are parallel trials, as we know, just like View 1 and View 2, and the RIDE and RISE, which are parallel trials that are needed for any molecule to be approved by the US FDA and the European Union. So the Hawk trial was held in the United States, and the Harrier trial was held globally, excluding the United States. Both were parallel trials. The only difference was, other than the site, the Hawk also compared brolucizumab 3 milligram, 6 milligram to aflibercept, whereas the Harrier trial only had two arms, the 6 milligram of brolucizumab and aflibercept. Both these trials together had about 408 study trials. Now, what was the aim of this particular trial was to know whether it is not inferior to aflibercept in mean change of BCVA or maintaining the visual acuity or having a better visual acuity or not. The secondary endpoint were to see how much of visual acuity could be improved, how did the fluid vanish by using this molecule, and whether we can have the disease activity controlled properly by week 16. And the more important thing was to have the proportion of patients whom we could have maintained on Q12 interval, that is nearly a 3 monthly interval, which we know would reduce the burden on the patients, and to predict how much percent of the patients will go on Q12. Now, this was basically the study design. There were initially 3 loading doses, and at 16 week, the disease activity assessment was done. Now, if you found that the disease activity was well controlled, then the patients on brolucizumab arm were shifted either to Q12 or Q8, depending upon the disease activity assessment. And the aflibercept arm patients continued on 8 weekly injections. Now, the disease activity assessment was meant to know whether we can continue the patients on 8 weekly in the brolucizumab arm, or we can shift the patient to a Q12 dosing in the brolucizumab arm. Now, what actually was assessed is whether the disease is active. And how do you know the disease is active? If there is a decrease in the BCVA, or there is a neovascular AMD activity which was seen at DZ16 in form of either the central foveal thickness increase, or you find newer fluid, or anything that suggests a disease activity. However, after that, every four weekly, the disease was assessed. And at that time, the assessment was purely made on basis of BCVA due to neovascular AMD disease, whether the BCVA is decreased. Now, the point to note was a patient who was shifted from 12 weekly injection to 8 weekly injection because of a disease activity was never shifted back to 12 weekly once the disease is inactivated, but was continued with 8 weekly treatment till the end of the study. So we had a significant chunk of patients who went from 12 to 8, but then they were not put back to 12 like we would do in real life, but they were maintained on 8 weekly dosing. And that's what we need to maintain in our mind when we look at the statistics. So what did we come to know about the non-inferiority in terms of visual acuity maintenance or gain? Well, it is comparable. Both were about 6 letters improvement in aflibercept as well as brolucizumab arm. And therefore, the first primary endpoint was met, that the brolucizumab was not inferior to aflibercept in terms of visual acuity improvement. Now, how many proportion of patients who gained more than 15 letters from baseline or a best corrected visual acuity of more than 84 letters at week 8? Again, you will see that here both the arms are nearly comparable. In fact, the HAWK trial showed a slightly superior visual acuity gain as compared to aflibercept in this particular arm. But where did the difference really come in? The difference came in looking at the central macular thickness or the fluid. Like if you see here, the brolucizumab arm had a very nicely maintained diminished in the central macular thickness, whereas there is a seesaw pattern that can be seen in aflibercept with the activity reducing after the injection and again going up before the injection. So the seesaw pattern was not there in the brolucizumab arm as compared to aflibercept arm. Now, is this important in real life? It is, because when you take a particular cohort which had got a maximum fluctuation in central macular thickness, it was found that the visual acuity gain was not as good as compared to the patients who didn't have a fluctuation in the central foveal thickness. Even when you saw these quartiles, which had a lesser fluctuation to a more fluctuation, you will see that the quartile which has maximum fluctuation had the least amount of visual acuity improvement, and the quartile with the least fluctuation had the maximum one. So when you read the whole cohort, it's a different game. But when you break up the cohort into different quartiles, you will find that the fluid fluctuation does make a difference in visual acuity improvement. Now, what about the drying effect? It was seen that aflibercept did dry, but brolucizumab was much, much superior to that in drying. The brolucizumab showed much more drying in intraretinal and subretinal fluids at week 16, 48, and 96 as compared to aflibercept. When you see the subset of it, you will find that if you just look at subretinal fluid also, the brolucizumab arm had a fantastic drying effect as compared to aflibercept. If you see the number of patients on brolucizumab who had patients in sub-RP group also, you will find that even in sub-RP group, the brolucizumab arm did much, much better than aflibercept arm. Now, did this same effect was seen in real world scenario by us? Well, it did. There's a 67-year-old male who came to me with a large subfoveal CMVM and had fluid in every compartment and along with some like shrimp material too. And just after 3 days of injection of brolucizumab, you can see that all 3 compartments are totally dry. And in fact, even the shrimp has started reducing. So the same effect that was mentioned in the HAWK and Harrier trials, we can actually even see in real world scenarios. Now, in another case, this was a 79-year-old male who was maintained on treat and extend. And this was the initial pictures of this patient. But as the treatment went on, I could see that there's always a pocket of subretinal fluid. Now, as per the fluid study, I said, okay, let's tolerate this fluid, and its treatment extension continued till the time I got brolucizumab in October, and I decided to replace the anti-VEGF agent with brolucizumab. And lo behold, what happened is this same stubborn subretinal fluid vanished after injection brolucizumab. So it just shows that there is a superior drying effect of brolucizumab as compared to the other anti-VEGF agents that we have. Now, what about the number of patients whom we could take on Q12 dosing? Well, you can see that roughly about 50% of the patients of brolucizumab 6 milligram could be maintained on 3 monthly dosing at week 48. Now, nearly 80% of these patients, means about 40% of the total patients, if you take as a cohort, could be maintained on Q12, remained up to the Q12 interval for a longer period of time, even after they have maintained a Q12 interval up to week 48. So we can see that we can reduce the burden quite a bit when the number of injections become less. And furthermore, if you see that right up to week 96, we can see that about roughly 40% of the patients who are put on brolucizumab could maintain themselves on Q12 interval. So that is a big boost for us as far as we can go in treatment of wet AMD by merely reduction of number of injections, plus we have a better drying effect and a more potent agent. Now look at this female patient who was with me, who had a very small CNVM, which was seen on Octa. And after giving brolucizumab, within a week, you can see the fluid is reduction. And this is the CNVM that can be seen clearly now. And I gave her the second injection, and she has maintained fluid free now for 16 weeks. So the point of showing this real clinical scenarios is that whatever is seen in the studies is not merely restricted to studies, but we can even replicate it in day-to-day life. So in the end, we can conclude that Hawk and Harrier showed that we can have good visual outcomes, good anatomical outcomes, and a Q12 interval injection with the brolucizumab arm, and we can actually stretch it to even 16 weeks if we try with the treat and extend or other regimen with them. Now, what about the real world evidence from the other countries? We can see that in the BRUCE study, which had a limited number of patients with only 4 centers, there are 42 patients. And these patients had 29 eyes who had single injection and 9 eyes who had 2 injections. And this study showed that at 7.2 weeks, the mean follow-up duration was there after brolucizumab. So you can imagine that the patients came once in 2 months, literally, and all eyes were treated more than. Hello?
Please continue. Please continue. Hold on, please. Timer. Yeah, you continue.
Yeah, sir, I'm just winding up. Yeah. Okay. And what did this study show? That there was a significant reduction in the central macular thickness. All the 3 fluid compartments showed a fantastic drying effect, and the BCVA also had a good amount of improvement. This is just an indicative case or a representative case from that study, which showed that the subretinal fluid, which did not respond, like my case, which I showed earlier, responded well with brolucizumab. Surprisingly, be good enough, we could see no inflammations in this particular sites. And I'm very glad that even in Indian eyes, we are yet to see any severe reported cases of occlusive vasculitis that has come in even after nearly 9 months of usage. Finally, just coming to the intraocular inflammations that we are so scared of, I think we should basically rule out any previous intraocular inflammation, and we can use whatever augmented multimodal imaging we have to rule it out. And we should report whatever inflammations that we get, and we can actually counsel the patients for any symptoms so that we can treat them easily and early with steroids so that it does not become more fulminant inflammations. So in summary, we know that anti-VEGF therapies are revolutionizing the outcomes, but there are still unmet medical needs. And I just hope that in the future to come, brolucizumab will meet these unmet needs and help us take the goals of achieving better visual acuity in our wet AMD patients further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nishikant, for laying solid foundation for this starting of this webinar. In fact, you have covered all the essence, whatever anybody wanted to hear. So, before we go on to the real world evidence, let me ask you how confident today you are to inject Brolucimab.
Yeah, so brolucizumab has now climbed the steps of hierarchy as far anti-VEGFs go. Now it is one of the main agent that I would be suggesting to my patients when they come with neovascular AMD too.
Let me very blunt. How many proportion of neovascular AMD do you treat with Brolucimab? What percentage?
So I would say about 60% now. It was 20% initially, now it has gone to about 60%.
So that's a very huge figure. Actually, this shows the confidence actually which you have on this drug. So, after hearing all this data from Hawk Harrier and also from Blue Study, and also some personal experiences which Nishikant has shown, because a lot of people are afraid today. Honestly, in a lot of centers which, a lot of retina work is done, people are afraid to shift to Brolucimab, and that's the whole purpose of allaying this fear that how many people are, doing this drug. And what I could gather was more than nearly 3,500 or 4,000 injections have already been given in our country. And whenever I speak to anybody, I have yet to come across a patient. Maybe I'll become wiser after this webinar, whether they do experience any inflammation or whatever experience I have. Honestly speaking, I have not seen any single patient who has had inflammation or who has had vasculitis after even this Merlin study, which has come up recently, which Novartis has stopped some this thing. But there was issues with that because Merlin was different protocol than Hawk and Harrier and whatever we do in real world scenario.